Welcome. Welcome, everyone. We have a full house here in the chapel. We have well over 100 online. So happy that you came out on this cold night. My name is Ty Sidgley. I'm the David H. and Ann L. Hinchcliffe Professor of History and the Executive Director of Common Ground. And I'd like to welcome our guests to the Hill, former members of Congress Matt Cartwright and Tom Rice, and our moderator, Dave Chanatry. This is the first Common Ground event we've had with two Hamilton College alums on the dais. Great to have you both here. Common Ground's mission is to promote and practice civil discourse to prepare students for active citizenship. And we work to create opportunities for our community to have respectful, honest conversations in a variety of different ways. So tonight's event has several follow-ups for any of you interested. Tomorrow, February 5th at 12 at the Levitt Center, we'll have a post-event lunch dialogue catered by LAFA. If it's a Common Ground event, we want to have lunch. On Friday, 6 February at 12 p.m. in the events barn, we'll have Common Ground continued with government professors Erica DeBrune, Heather Sullivan, and Joel Winkleman with lunch provided. And a couple of upcoming events, a new initiative. On 2 March at 6:30 in the events barn, Common Ground and the debate team will collaborate on an Oxford-style debate. Check out our newsletter on Common Ground, created by our Common Ground ambassadors. We have this program because of the support of leaders, faculty, alumni, and students. The college is especially grateful to Mary Helen and Rob Morris, David and Lori Hess, Eve Niquette, the Warning family, and the Pooley family. Their support is indispensable. I want to thank our Common Ground ambassadors and the Common Ground team, Katie and Kim. It's hard to believe that it's been 5 years since January 6, 2021. And I asked my first-year students in my Common Ground course, what grade were you in when this happened? And the answer was the 8th grade. So it's time, I think, for us to reflect on that day. So let me introduce our moderator, and he will introduce our guest. Dave Chanatry is a 1980 Hamilton graduate and a native Utican. He is Professor Emeritus of Journalism at Utica University. And before he became a professor, Dave spent 20 years at NBC as a journalist and producer. For 9 years, Dave has served as the host of Ivory Tower, a weekly discussion roundtable of current events at WCNY, our local PBS station in Syracuse. I am one of the panelists on that show, where I found Dave to be a professional who did the extra work to make a bunch of academics sound smarter than they really are. So Dave, thanks so much for returning to Hamilton. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ty. You're making me sound smarter than I really am. I'm sure everyone here is broadly familiar with what happened on January 6, 2021. Whether we think of it as an insurrection, a riot, a protest that got out of hand, we know the gist of it. But as Ty has just reminded us, some of the students here were 8th graders that day. Those not fully engaged with politics and the news may be surprised at everything that transpired. The months-long campaign to change the result of the election, culminating in the assault on the Capitol. The violence of that day, the vicious attacks on law enforcement, the exceedingly slow response of the president while the assault was underway, the dead and the injured. More than 2,000 people entered the Capitol. Some broke into the Senate chamber. Others tried to do so in the House. Our guests tonight are two people who were there on the floor of the House and who experienced it all firsthand. Former Representative Matt Cartwright, Hamilton class of 1983, as you just heard, represented Northeast Pennsylvania from 2013 to 2024. A Democrat and a member of the Progressive Caucus, he twice was elected in years his largely blue-collar district voted for Donald Trump for president. Representative Cartwright voted to impeach the president after January 6th. His good friend Tom Rice served 5 terms representing South Carolina's 7th district, a conservative district in a conservative state. During his tenure, Representative Rice was a strong supporter of President Trump, voting with him 94% of the time. Even so, he was one of only 10 Republicans who voted to impeach the president after the assault. For his vote, he was censured by the South Carolina Republican Party, primaried and defeated in 2022. Our guests were on opposite sides of the aisle, but often worked together, each co-sponsoring several bills the other had proposed. And while they usually disagreed on policy, they agreed on impeachment, and as I'm sure we'll hear tonight, there are several other areas in which they find common ground. So let's begin with the event itself. You were both there that day on the floor. Set the scene. Matt, how did things unfold?
Thank you for the kind words, David, and thanks for doing this for the college. I don't remember you when I was here, but
and me, you.
but we had 1 year we overlapped. Yeah, I was. There was a long run-up. There were 60 lawsuits that operatives of the Trump campaign filed to overturn the election. 59 of them they lost. They got one partial victory in one. It was in Pennsylvania, in northern Pennsylvania where I live, where one of the lawsuits came to fruition, and it went in front of Matthew Brann, a United States District Judge in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. You may remember Rudy Giuliani showed up to argue the case in front of Judge Brann, who was a Trump-appointed federal judge, and who threw Rudy out of court, said that the allegations in Rudy's complaint amounted to nothing more than a Frankenstein monster of loosely stitched together arguments with no substance at all. I actually quoted him in my speech on the floor. I was honored by being given the job of giving the closing argument for accepting the Pennsylvania Electoral College votes to elect Joe Biden. And I showed up about shortly after 2 p.m. that day, and there was quite a crowd assembling already. Mm-hmm. I was surprised. The Capitol Police told me, well, you can't go in through the normal door. I said, what? And they said, here's the door you have to go through. And there was a special door because they were concerned about security. It wasn't until later on that I found that on November 9, after the election, Donald Trump fired Defense Secretary Mark Esper and replaced him with a man named Christopher Miller, who at Trump's insistence on January 4th issued an order that the D.C. National Guard could not be deployed to secure the Capitol without his say-so. And we'll talk about that later. But I was there to give a speech. I was not able to give the speech. We were evacuated. I came back and gave that speech at 2 a.m. the next day.
So Tom, what did it feel like on the floor then? I mean, things are developing in an unusual way. Matt was giving his speech, and security was there. Could you hear what was going on? Did you know there was a mob out there?
Well, it was COVID times, and so we were still trying to keep somewhat apart, so the house was spread out. But even before that, I lived about a block and a half from the Capitol, and I was in my apartment waiting to come to the floor when the fire alarm went off in my apartment. And my apartment was just across an alley from the National Republican Congressional Committee's headquarters. Well, so I walked outside, and there were hundreds of police and firemen around, and they said that there was a bomb in the alley between my apartment and the National Republican Congressional Committee. So that was my, first awareness that day. And to even step back 2 days before that, I knew that there was going to be some kind of an event. I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal that President Trump would orchestrate it to the extent that he did. But when I heard there was going to be an event that day, what concerned me was, it occurred to me on the night of January the 4th, there's going to be counter-protesters here, and it's going to be a riot. There's going to be protesters and counter-protesters fighting in the streets, and buildings will burn and that type of thing. I didn't ever consider that Trump supporters would be attacking the Capitol. But I woke up in the middle of the night thinking about that, and the next day on January the 5th, I told my staff, you guys don't come to work tomorrow, and go to the ATM and get a little bit of money and put it in your pocket and go fill your car up with gas, because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I had no idea that what unfolded would unfold, but I thought that it could be significant. So on that day, I was waiting in my apartment for the debate to start, and I was preparing to leave when the fire alarm went off. I had to walk way around to get to the Capitol. And we got in and began debate, and it wasn't long before the president ended his speech and the crowd headed toward the Capitol. And the sergeant at arms came in and said, "This is getting out of hand, and we may need to be prepared to evacuate." Well, I'd been in Congress for 8 years, that never happened. And he came in 5 minutes later and said, "Well, the crowd has actually breached the Capitol, and tear gas has been deployed in the rotunda, and we're going to have to evacuate you, and you better get your safety kits." You know, we're members of Congress. We're not police officers. And I knew there was a safety kit. I'd never had an inkling that I would ever have to use it. I wasn't even sure exactly where it was. And so everybody was pulling out their safety kits, and you could hear folks screaming in the rotunda of the Capitol. And I took out my phone and I took a little 30-second video. You're not supposed to take pictures on the floor of the Capitol, but it was such a momentous time. And you could see a lot of folks who were, very ardent Trump supporters and very ardent conservatives that were ripping open their safety kits and putting on gas masks. And those same folks who were that scared and worried about what was unfolding a week later voted not to impeach Donald Trump and got up and talked about how it wasn't that big of a deal. But anyway, in next few minutes, the chaplain of the House got up on the dais and began to pray. And you could hear the people beating on the door, trying to get onto the floor where we were, and glass breaking. And the police cleared a path in the back of the house and entered and took us down through the tunnels away from the floor of the house. Well, while we were walking through the tunnels, we passed a group of Capitol police officers coming towards us that had been beaten. One of them was in a wheelchair. One had bandages on his face and blood all over his face. And that struck me very hard. So I guess I'll stop there and we can fill in the rest later on.
So was there any point at which you felt in danger? Like this, okay, this is a serious thing happening now. You're seeing these police officers.
Dave, there wasn't. And I should have felt endangered, but I wasn't. I didn't feel that way. Why? Because we don't have television monitors on the floor of the House. It's like in here, you don't see any televisions. So if you were at home watching cable TV, you could see what was going on. And we were told on occasion, they would get on the PA system, the Capitol Police, and give us a report. Well, some protesters have broken into the building. So I had in my pea brain that there were 6 or 7 yahoos that broke into a window. In fact, it was closer to 1,200 yowling misfits with God knows what in their intentions. So I never really got scared. But I'll tell you one thing. Tom mentioned going through the tunnel. And, there are heroes in this story. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention their names, Dave. 2 of the people who were fighting the battle of protecting the tunnel through which Tom and I were evacuated that day and saved were Michael Fanone and Daniel Hodges, 2 Capitol Police officers who were severely beaten. Fanone was beaten unconscious with pipes. Hodges was crushed in a doorway. What they were doing was defending the tunnel that saved us. And their heroes. Harry Dunn, misled over on the Senate side, he misled the rioters and led them the wrong way, away from where the senators were hiding. But more than anything, that's physical courage they were displaying. But remember, there's political courage too. And I have brought to you Tom Rice, my friend from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, as an example, a shining example of political courage, because he was one of the 10 Republican members of Congress to impeach Donald Trump over what he incited that day and the way he acted and how long he took to tell people to dispel. He's one of 10 heroes of mine, and I hope you join me in thanking him and congratulating him.
We should. One of the other 10 was a congressman from right next door in the district next to us, John Katko, a federal prosecutor.
John Katko, another one of the heroes.
Who
That's
also
right.
is no longer a congressman. You can make of that what you will. So you said you didn't feel in danger, really, but it was a close call.
I mean, I think if you removed your safety kit from under the chair, you did that because you felt in danger, right? When people were piling furniture against the door to prevent these people from coming in, you felt in danger. I mean, the truth is, people will say, well, they didn't have any guns. You don't know that they didn't have guns. Nobody knows. These people didn't walk through a metal detector. You knew they had pipe bombs, right? You knew they had tear gas, and you knew they had hand restraints. There were pictures of people walking around with handcuffs on the Senate floor. What do you think they would have done with those handcuffs had they actually encountered a United States senator?
Well, as they were going through and they were chanting "Hang Mike Pence," and they apparently got quite close to the vice president.
So one of the things that convinced me to vote to impeach, it was chaos that day. And to finish the story about walking through the tunnel and passing the Capitol Police officers, we passed by groups of Capitol Police officers with machine guns standing in intersections of hallways to prevent people from walking in. And the people that were on the House of Representatives is kind of like this. It's got a main floor and it's got a balcony. And you can't get to the main floor from the balcony unless you walk out into the public areas. So the main floor was evacuated, but there were 30 or 40 Congress people, mostly Democrats, because they were doing their COVID thing, separating, right? So they're up in the balcony, and they couldn't get out. And Ashley Babbitt, who was shot, the lady that was shot trying to enter the House floor, was shot about a minute after Matt and I were taken off the House floor. Actually, we were walking through the House floor, and through the tunnels, and somebody said, "Shots fired." I didn't know what they were talking. I mean, I knew they were talking, but I didn't know who got shot or who did the shooting. Well, people have asked me about that, and I wish no ill will on Ashley Babbitt. I don't know that she was an evil person, but I believe that Capitol police officer did exactly the right thing, because he was the last one between that group of people where Ashley Babbitt was and those congressmen that were up in that balcony. There were 30 or so congressmen up there, and nobody knows what would have happened had that group of protesters actually come face to face with those congressmen. But I suspect that it would have been bad. I suspect it would have been very bad. And so this Capitol police officer, not knowing who he was facing in terms of how they were armed and so forth, how's he supposed to react to that? So I think he did exactly the right thing.
Now, I said I wasn't particularly afraid. Probably I should have been. I wasn't. Tom was filming people on the floor. We had no idea how many people were out there. But after that gun went off, we had already been evacuated for a minute. If you saw me scrolling through my pictures, I took a picture of the speaker's lobby through which we were evacuated. That's where Ashley Babbitt was shot. And
did you hear it?
Pardon me?
Did you hear the gunshot?
I did not. And I had a reporter call me up, and he was doing a timeline a few months later, and he said, when did you get evacuated? I said, I don't know. I said, wait a minute. I took a picture, and there's a timestamp on pictures. I pulled it up, and he told me that's a minute after the shot happened, a minute after we went through there. Now think of it. Tom's right. There is no interior set of stairs onto the House floor from the gallery. So if you're going to escape, you have to go out into the hallways where there are marauding bands of whack jobs with who knows what in their minds. And so those people were scared, particularly when the gun went off. And my dear friend Susan Wild from Allentown had a panic attack. And Jason Crow, a Democratic member from Colorado who was a paratrooper and had some medical training, was attending to her and trying to calm her down. But Susan thought she was a goner.
So after you were then evacuated, you were sequestered with other members of Congress. Tom, you're there with other Republican congressmen, and I'm wondering what was the feeling there? What were they saying? I mean, Trump is their guy.
So most of the congressmen were taken to a committee room that held a lot of people. And I happened to be walking with a member of the Republican leadership, right, a leader who I was friends with. And his office happened to be in the same building where they were taking everybody into this big committee room. So he said, I'm going to my office, and can I come with you? So he and I just branched off from the other guys and went into his office and closed the door. And his office was on the street level of, and you could, it had big windows, and you could see thousands of people milling around out there. And he went over and pulled the shades because he didn't want these folks to see him. Well, you can say, well, was he not scared? Well, there was a reason why he's pulling the shades, right? And he went to his back room and got a baseball bat. You don't know what's going to happen. The building's empty. You can hear people walking down the hall. You don't know who's going to come through the door, right? So he's got a baseball bat. And we were getting people calling us. My phone and his phone both were blowing up. People back home, mostly news folks, some family, some friends, worried about where we were, our safety, and so forth. And I took a picture of, he pulled out a bottle of bourbon and poured me a drink. And I had my iPad and my safety kit that I hadn't opened. And I put the glass of bourbon there, and I texted it out to my family and friends and said, I got all I need, my bourbon, my safety kit. But what was worrying me, what was really bothering me at that time was, here we've been under this attack for, at this time, 2 hours. And I didn't know, I never did Twitter. I didn't know what the president was doing, but the TV was on. He had Fox News on. And there was no president on the TV saying, this has got to stop. And I thought back to all the people that had been president my whole life. I was born in 1957. So you start with Eisenhower and Kennedy and Johnson and Nixon, even Nixon, and Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and George H.W. and going on through, even Bill Clinton. I couldn't think of a single president that would not have had the integrity to get on the TV and say, this has got to stop, right? You got to quit this, you got to go home. He sent them down there. And you can argue about whether what he said at that rally was incitement of a riot. You can argue whether the terms he used, and he's smart. He goes right up to the line, goes over the line, backs up, goes over the line again, backs up. You can argue whether that was incitement of a riot. But once the riot started and the people are deploying tear gas and mic cut, and they're looking for somebody to grab, and the president sends out a tweet that says Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what we needed him to do. Now, think about that. The people have already breached the Capitol. They're looking for Mike Pence. And the president sends out that incendiary tweet. That alone, to me, was all the incitement that he needed to do. That when I found that out, I really had no choice about whether I was going to vote to impeach or not.
And keep in mind, the president is looking at the cable coverage that we couldn't see, and he's watching what looks like a medieval battle scene, out on the plaza outside the Capitol. There were 174 Capitol policemen injured. 5 of them died. 1 died the next day from a stroke related to the stress. The others took their own lives within 6 months because of the stress they had gone through. And
other folks died too, including Ashley
protesting,
Babbitt.
Including Ashley
Babbitt and a couple people collapsed who were there to protest.
Right.
So you said you can argue, the point whether the president incited this or not. So let's dig into that a little bit. I mean, the why. Why the heck did this happen? Matt, I'll give you first crack.
All right, we are here commemorating, noting the 5-year anniversary of this insurrection. We're certainly not here celebrating it, Ty. But there's one person who is, and that's Donald J. Trump, because on the 5-year anniversary of that day, the statute of limitations for all of the federal crimes that he committed for his part in that insurrection expired. Now, legal scholars will tell you there's an argument that him being the president and not being able to indict him while he's in the White House, that told the statute of limitations so that they can bring a case later. But the consensus seems to be that it would take congressional action to change that so that he could be held accountable for these crimes.
So this gathering in Washington didn't spring up organically. The president had tweeted, "Be there on January. Be there. It'll be wild."
It'll be wild.
A few weeks before that, he wanted his supporters there. I mean, it sure looks like his plan was to have them there to pressure Congress and to pressure the vice president. I mean, is that not incitement?
To have a crowd show up and peacefully demonstrate, absolutely not. To ask them to commit violence, for sure. And what he said in his speech, if you look at it, is go fight like hell, but we need to be peaceful. But go fight like hell because our country's on the line, but be peaceful. So no, I think he's smart enough to go to the line and go over it and go back and go over it and go back, so he could argue that. But again, to me, the fact that after it started, and he sat there for 4 hours and did nothing to stop it, in fact encouraged it while it was going on, is all that I needed to know. And when that day, I knew that I wasn't seeing the president on TV. And when I was having local media call me back from home and asking me what was going on, and I asked them, "Where's the president? Where's the president? Where's the president?" And nobody could answer. And when I got back home, after that long day was over, the next day actually, we flew back home, and I asked my staff, I want to know exactly what the president was doing that day. Where was he? What was he doing? Why was he not calling for the violence to end? And then they came up with the first timeline that I saw of what he was doing and where he was. And he was in a dining room right beside the Oval Office eating an order from McDonald's and actually swelled up with pride that for this havoc that he had wrought. He was proud of it. He was happy that it was occurring, and rather than taking effort to protect these people. And the fact that, here years later, he pardons the people that beat up these police officers and killed these police officers. He pardons them. I don't know how you can say that you support law enforcement, right? If you're going to do something as hypocritical as that.
And I don't see how you can say you support the Constitution or even American democracy if when the legislative branch, which is Article 1 of the Constitution, doesn't do what the executive branch wants, if when that happens you send a mob down to attack the Capitol, the legislative branch, for not working your will, that is an absolute attack on our Constitution, and it goes against the oath that all of us took, including the executive branch.
Some of those people weren't there because they intended to break into the Capitol. Maybe many of them weren't intending to break into the Capitol when they went to Washington because the president called them there. They thought this was their duty because they truly believed that the election was fraudulent. So, I mean, I guess they're not all the same. Does that make sense to you, or maybe it doesn't?
Well, what springs to my mind when you hit me with that argument is then, first of all, the election was not fraudulent. 59 out of 60 courts had decided that and had ridiculed the claims supporting the fraudulent idea. You make that, it makes me think, well, people who commit bank robberies and murders can say, well, you know what, I truly in my heart believe that that's my money, so I should go get it and shoot people to get it. I mean, you don't put up with defenses like that in court.
Now, in the most recent election, Donald Trump got 77 million votes. So why don't people care more about what happened on January 6th?
The truth is that not everybody really cares about democracy. There are a lot of people in this country who, if you told them I'll give you an extra $10,000 in your paycheck if you vote to abrogate the Constitution, they'd be fine with that. And it's our job to spread the idea of American democracy. Those of us here who sit in a place named after Alexander Hamilton, who put his own life on the line for the idea that we're not going to have kings, that we're going to have democracy where the people decide what happens in the government, it's on us to get out there and spread the word. Democracy is good. The Constitution should be supported. This experiment in America should go on. We should do that.
Tom?
In my bubble in South Carolina, I think most people would rather we just move on. In my bubble in South Carolina, I think that people think it's litigated enough and it's time to move on with it. Although I don't think it will die. I think many Americans recognize what a significant threat that was to our country. And you know, when as a Republican member of the House of Representatives and with a very conservative voting record, I am a conservative and I believe in the platform that the Republican Party professes because I believe it is the way to provide more opportunity to you folks so that when you're out looking for, you know, jobs and opportunity for you and your family in the coming decades, that this is the way to do it. That's why I'm a Republican. But people get lost. I mean, what Matt said, they get frustrated with government. It doesn't move fast enough for them. It doesn't affect them enough on a daily level, and they get to the point that they would prefer an authoritarian. But if the president is allowed to say to the Congress, the legislative branch, you know, the way the Constitution works, the Congress makes the laws and has the purse strings. The administrative branch, the president, is only supposed to enforce the laws that the Congress makes. If the executive branch can say, look, if you don't vote the way I want you to, I'm going to sit in the White House like a mafia don, and I'm going to send a group down there to bloody you up. If you don't vote the way I want you to, I will beat you up and you will pay the price. If that's where we are, then we've already lost America. And I don't know the difference between Donald Trump and Maduro, right? If that's where we are, we're more like Venezuela.
So can we draw a line, a direct line from January 6th to the presidential behavior this second term?
Well, he hasn't really cleaned up his act, has he?
Well, I think you could argue it's gone even farther.
Clearly you
far
can.
away from Article 2.
He is unrestrained right now in many of the things that he does, accepting huge monetary gifts from foreign leaders, having a Bitcoin arrangement where if you want to curry favor with the president. He buys Bitcoin and it goes right in his back pocket. I regretted very much that he got elected a second time. But more than anything, because he was utterly unrepentant about the insurrection. He did. He pardoned. There were over 1,000 people convicted, about 2/3 of whom pleaded guilty to their federal crimes. He pardoned them. Look, the last time our capital got attacked in this country was in August of 1814. It's a big deal, folks. It only happens every couple hundred years, and we're right to note the 5-year anniversary of that horrible stain on our country's history.
Well, I mean, if the president can, by pardoning these people, he's created a loyal army, right? A militia. And if the president decides, well, you know, I want this person taken care of or that person taken care of, and he can pardon the people who do it, you're in a very scary place. Again, we're more like Venezuela than we are America. And so, after January 6th, we go home for a week and we come back to vote to impeach. And, you know, friends of mine, like, I won't call names in this forum. I guess I will. My friend and senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, on January 7th said, well, he's lost me. The president has lost me. And a lot of other people said the same thing. And we come back to vote on whether he should be impeached. Now, we know that anybody with eyes and a brain knows this is a direct attack on the legislative branch and a violation of the Constitution. And the oath that we take says, I promise to protect and defend the Constitution, and another sentence or two that basically says I'll carry out my duties, which really doesn't mean a whole lot. The only part that means anything is I will protect and defend the Constitution. And so I don't want to vote to impeach. I know I'll suffer, you know, consequences for it. But if I have that vote to take, I really have no choice on what I'm supposed to do. Either I'm going to uphold my oath or I'm going to protect my seat, right? That's what it comes down to. And so there was never a question. I had no choice on how I was going to vote. Of course I was going to vote to impeach. And then to have so many other folks, even those who said, you know, he lost me, to vote the other way is just a horribly disappointing political calculation. I think a lot of those folks decided, well, you know, that was January the 6th. It's over with. The president, we'll have a new president sworn in on January the 20th, and we'll never hear from Donald Trump again. He has, you know, burned his last bridge. There's no way he'll ever run again, or if he did, he wouldn't win. And I mean, it wasn't just politicians that had turned against him. Fox News had turned against him. Sean Hannity was calling him out, and what's the lady, I can't remember her name, on Fox News, the big commentator, and
Maria Bartiromo?
Yeah.
No, doesn't matter.
Yeah, Laura Ingraham, and his own daughter, Ivanka, said, I've had enough, this is it, you know? And the fact that he survived that and then came back and won the next election is just both fascinating and very scary to me.
So you mentioned Lindsey Graham. He said, count me out, enough is enough.
Yeah.
Have you spoken with him about it?
No. I saw him recently, and, you know, they know. They know.
Okay. Now, your vote to impeach was, so we should clarify. It wasn't the attack itself, it was the response. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can argue about whether he incited it. You can argue about, you know, the legalities of it. But when he sat on his hands and watched those police officers getting beaten, and the lawmakers only by luck and God and the grace of God not getting, if those folks had gotten a hold of Mike Pence, what do you think would have happened? What do you think would have happened? And Mike Pence's wife and son there, you know, how cold and callous can you possibly be? So when it came time to vote to impeach, and I knew I would suffer the consequences of it. And it was, it was not easy, right? But it was not really a choice. So I voted. The way the vote came, we were just up there for that one vote, and my plane to fly home to Myrtle Beach was leaving very quickly after that vote. So I had to get out of there. So I was one of the first ones to hit the vote button. And of course, we have everybody's name up on the wall. And Rice, South Carolina, very high conservative score, very conservative politician, goes up yes on the impeachment vote. Well, there was a murmur, right, and I run out the back door to get to my plane. Well, my phone rings before I even get down the stairs, and it's the majority whip, Steve Scalise. And he says, "Tom, you need to come back." I said, "Why?" He said, "You hit the wrong button."
Oh. Thanks, Steve.
I said, "No, I hit the right button." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I'm absolutely sure." And I went to the airport.
This has been a very heavy discussion, but I want to tell you, I am filled with optimism today and in the future for this country because we have principled people like Tom Rice ready to stand up and do the right thing. Tom and I disagree on just about every policy issue you can think of. He's a rock rib Republican, and I'm a FDR Democrat, and we disagree about a lot of kind of boring things like health care and what you spend money on and how much the taxes are going to be. But when it comes to sticking up for the Constitution, when we have people like Tom Rice in this country, we're going to be okay.
Okay, so how do we get back to a place where civility is and compromise our approaches to each other and to governing? I mean, right now we're at each other's throats.
There are a lot of culprits in that. Tom and I sat through APP, and if you haven't taken APP yet, shame on you. You need to take that, and it's a wonderful course. And I took that in 1981, and it filled me with admiration for the people willing to put their names on ballots and run for such things as the U.S. House. Look, this is our country, and what happens to this country depends on what we do, what our decisions are, what we say, and whether we're going to spread the gospel of democracy and sticking up for our Constitution. But the culprits are, in the APP course we talked about gerrymandering. You end up with hyper-democratic districts and hyper-Republican districts where you get punished, you get primaried if you don't vote the most extreme view of your party. Another set of culprits are cable news. You have some, as Tom puts it, they figured out how to make money off of partisanship. And so we have MSNBC and we have Fox, and they're not really news, they're opinions, both of those channels. And they gin people up to really dislike each other and think that, on Fox, they think Democrats have tails. I was in a purple district, and I would go on Fox News a lot. And it was a low bar for me to please people that watch Fox, because I'd go on there and I'd be genial and I'd compliment the host and crack a couple of jokes, and I'd listen to the prior interview, and invariably it'd be a member of Congress, a Republican, that I knew. And I didn't really like what he was saying on Fox News, but I had worked with that member before, and almost always I had passed a bill with that member, and I come on and I say, "Well, hey, Griff, how are you? I just heard your interview with Dave Joyce, and Dave Joyce and I, we combined and we passed my bill, the Camp Lejeune Justice Act, together, and I'll always be grateful to him for his vote on that." That knocks them over. Somebody who's friendly, who's complimentary, they don't know what to do with that, and it just ruins their whole narrative that Democrats have two horns and a tail. That was one thing I did, but I really think that the development of these hyper-partisan channels, and it's going to get worse with the internet, because there's no controls whatsoever. You know, Tom likes to talk about a famous journalist that he admired, and I'm with him on that.
Yeah, when we were growing up, you know, we took horses and buggies to school, right? But we had 3 news networks. That was all we had. In fact, in Myrtle Beach, we only got 2. On a clear day, you could turn the antenna just the right way, you get CBS. But there was Walter Cronkite and Huntley Brinkley and one other. And so, you know, we were all, these people had standards that they had to live by, right? They had to answer to the FCC, and they also had editorial boards that were careful. And so they were careful about separating news and opinion, and the country was fed pretty much the same thing. It didn't really matter which one of those channels you watched. It's pretty much the same thing. And so we were much more homogenous. And then, as Matt said, you know, somebody figured out you could make money by ginning people up, and so along comes Fox News, and in response comes MSNBC, and in my opinion, CNN and others that speak to, you know, you can choose now from 25 different news channels, and you can pick your favorite, and the reason they're your favorite is because they say what you like. Not what the bottom line is, they don't represent the other side. In fact, they attack the other side. They call it news, but it's really opinion. And the effect of it is that you're isolated in your silo, and you really don't even understand or hear or want to understand what the other side has to say. And that needs to be resolved. And then the other, which I think is a cancer, but it'll never go away, is social media. I know, you know, everybody in this room loves it and lives on it. And I had it briefly for 10 years when I was in Congress. I had to communicate with my constituents. But the day I left Congress, I went to my communications person and I said, close down my Twitter account and close down my Facebook account. I always hated Twitter. I hate the idea that grown men can communicate by something called a tweet. I just hate that. But it's so incendiary, and there is no Walter Cronkite anymore. I would tell people at my town halls, look, Walter Cronkite has been replaced by Twitter, because anybody can get on and say anything, and whether it has a grain of truth or not is really not material, and they'll drag along 1,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000 people into that sinkhole, and it's toxic. And it creates a lot of this problem. And how you resolve it, I'm really not sure.
There's no question we need more Walter Cronkites and more Dave Chanatrys.
Okay. We will go shortly to questions from students. But I want to ask, what was the lesson? Is there a lesson of January 6th? I mean, what is it? What lesson did Donald Trump take from January 6th? What lesson should we take from January 6th?
Don't take American democracy for granted. You know, after the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin came out of Constitution Hall and Independence Hall, and some lady asked him, Mr. Franklin, what kind of government do we have? And he said, Madam, we have a republic, if we can keep it.
Well, then, what does it mean? What does January 6th mean, Tom, for the future of our democracy?
Well, it scares me a lot. And, you know, one of the reasons is because so much of the public doesn't believe that the government really has a direct effect on them. They think it's terribly broken, and they, because of the dysfunction, and they believe that it doesn't matter to them. So the idea that it would falter is not something that bothers them necessarily. I had people, you know, when I was making my tour, the end result of my voting to impeach was that I lost my primary 75 to 25. That shows you how strong, people felt about Donald Trump in South Carolina. But in my touring the state and my district to try to explain why I did what I did, I was talking to a guy in a farmer's market one day, old fella, he was loading up his produce. At the end of the day, his hair was all messed up, he's in coveralls, he's got a 2-day beard on his face. And he said, you know what I don't like about January 6th? And I said, no. He said, they didn't go far enough. And you know what? There's a lot of folks out there, plain folks. There's a lot of folks out there that believe that, right? When Donald Trump was running the first time, I didn't support Donald Trump in the primary. I thought he was too crazy. But once he won the primary, I said, well, let's ride this horse and see how far it'll take us to advance priorities that make this a land of opportunity. My kids were coming out of college. We still hadn't recovered from the 2008 financial crisis. It was 8 years later. And I wanted to do something about that, and I was proud of the things that we accomplished while Trump was in his first term. But when he was running the first time, one thing that always made me mad as hell, when he'd get in front of those liberal reporters, no, just kidding, and they would ask him, they asked him every time, will you respect the results of the election if you lose? And they never would ask Hillary that question. They would only ask Donald Trump. And that infuriated me. Why in the hell would you think he wouldn't when she would? Now, he would never give them a straight answer, which kind of egged it on, right? Well, I said, of course he will. Nobody would not do that. Well, on January 6th, he proved me wrong. Well, so we have January 6th. Lindsey Graham says he lost me. Mitch McConnell votes not to impeach and then gets up and says Donald Trump screwed up. I mean, what a chicken thing to do, right? He could have brought it along. He could have ended it. But he decided he'd make the political calculation to try to make sure we elected more Republican senators rather than finish up the impeachment process. We go through all that, and then Donald Trump is attacked by prosecutors overzealously, and that resulted in him being resurrected, in my opinion. But he gets elected again, even in the face of January 6th. I thought there would be no way he would ever get elected again, but he did. And that scares me a lot. And it does worry me when he says things like he's been saying the last couple of days, we need to nationalize elections. It does worry me when you see them deploying federal troops in cities. I'm a big proponent against illegal immigration, but I also worry about seeing what we're seeing in a lot of these cities, right? So will he respect the results of the next election? I always thought it was absurd to say that he wouldn't in the first one, and he proved me wrong. We'll see what happens in the second one.
Okay, let's take some questions from students. There should be student ambassadors with microphones. So just raise your hand, and they'll find you, and you can ask away.
Thank you. Thank you for visiting Hamilton. I want to kind of stay on the topic of going into the 26 midterms. And I was wondering, with these pushes to nationalize elections, I was wondering, as the people, how can we fight against this? We need to be preemptive in it. How will we do this? He set this precedent at January 6th that he does not care about what the voters say. What do we do to fight against this?
Matt, you want to take that one?
No, but I will. Yeah, it's a problem. He does tend to have no filters, our president, and he tells you what he wants to do, and he always means it, no matter how reprehensible it is. He does have a completely supine House of Representatives right now, led by the intrepid Mike Johnson, who apparently is afraid of his own shadow. And so Trump could be rest assured that anything he wants through the House will pass. And right now that's not true of the Senate. Senate, you know, they have this, I often complain about the filibuster rule, the rule that you need 60 votes to cut off debate in the Senate. There's a wonderful book by a fellow I know named Adam Gentleson called Kill Switch. And it's a comprehensive argument about how that 60-vote filibuster threshold has held back progressive change over the years and made it take way too long to enact things like civil rights or voting rights, things like that. But sometimes you really are grateful to have that 60-vote threshold because that's a protection that we have against those abuses.
So, Tom, is there something that could be done about to prevent nationalization? I mean, the Constitution's pretty clear on that, is it not?
Yeah, so, you know, you talk about being preemptive. The Constitution is preemptive for you. You have the Constitution on your side. Does that mean that Donald Trump won't try to some mechanism to get around the Constitution, whether it be on states running their own elections or on the, which amendment is it that prevents the president from serving 3 terms? What amendment is that? I don't know. One of those amendments. So, but the Constitution is on your side, and it will carry a lot of the burden. And I know that if the federal government moves to control how Pennsylvania or New York or California handle their elections, I promise you there will be teams of lawyers and protesters that will be fighting that every step of the way.
Okay. Any other questions?
Good evening. First of all, thank you for being here and thank you for your service and more importantly, your integrity. I am not a student, but my name is Will Staten and I am actually running for the New York 22nd congressional seat as an independent candidate in the November midterms. And so I'm going to ask y'all a question that I think I already know the answer to, but I'm curious for your perspective anyhow. Do you think within the confines of the current 2-party system we can actually find common ground?
I do. And thank you for having the courage to put your name on a ballot. Not many people do. And get ready, because that's a contact sport, running for Congress. Good answer. Look, the situation is that more and more people are becoming independents, like you. They're sick of the, I alluded earlier to the bright blue districts and the bright red districts. People who never have to worry about a re-election fight in a general election. The only worry they have is that they'll get primaried by somebody more extreme than they are. Those are the people that end up in House leadership, the people in the brightest blue and the brightest red districts. And people are sick and tired of the partisanship. It's really one of the reasons I'm optimistic about this country, because I believe that there is a wellspring of goodness in America, that when abuses get piled one on top of the other in this country, people object, people stand up and say, stop this. We're seeing it right now in response to the horrible overzealous ICE brigades going around. We've seen it before. We saw it after Bloody Sunday in 1965, when all of America, it was a Sunday night, they saw the Sunday night CBS, NBC, ABC News, and they saw peaceful protesters on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, being beat senseless by Alabama state policemen. And they were shocked by that. And almost as a direct result of the public seeing that, we passed the voting rights bill in record time in 1965. there is a wellspring of goodness in this country that will rise up and say enough is enough. But I think that's part of what's happening with people's reaction to the hyper-partisanship they're seeing in Congress, is that they're going to be independents. People that are sick of Donald Trump are leaving the Republican Party and becoming independents. And the same thing with some Democrats who think that the Democratic Party is too extreme as well. So good luck to you. I happen to like John Mannion a lot, I have to tell you.
Can I respond to that too?
Yeah. All right.
Well, I think you have good reason not to trust these two groups. And I think, what Matt alluded to about the Republican Congress at this point being supine to Donald Trump is absolutely true. And, the basis of the Republican Party is conservatism. And conservatism wants to preserve what's good about the country, right? And the source of our freedom, the underlying foundation of our government and our freedom is the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and it has to be protected at all costs. And so when I see my friends who profess to be conservatives and don't defend the Constitution by voting to impeach Donald Trump after January 6th, it makes me nauseous. And today, when they watch him overstepping his authority under Article 1, and they don't respond to that, and they see the level of corruption, because it is incredibly corrupt what they're doing now, with Saudis buying Trump Bitcoin and putting $2 billion into World Finance, which is owned by Eric and Don Jr., and Trump pardoning Chinese fraudsters and so on and so forth. It is shockingly corrupt. And so that's bad. The same thing 2 years ago when Hunter Biden took $500,000 from Burisma, and I was still in Congress, and giving my friends on the Democrat side hell because they were in the majority and we were in the minority, and they were also supine, right? And not, it used to be that up until probably 20 or 30 years ago, the center of the Congress governed. There were always loud voices. Jesse Helms, George McGovern. These folks didn't govern. They were loud voices, but they weren't the people who ran the country. And the center of both parties ran the country. And somehow we have devolved to the point where no party will do anything significant unless they have the Senate and the House and the presidency, and then they'll cram through whatever they can in whatever period of time. And often it's very divisive, and it makes it even worse. And you got to break that logjam somehow. You got to get back to where reasonable people are elected and do a reasonable job of governing. And I believe part of that may be more parties, to force people to have to work together so that nobody ever has that level of majority, and you have to compromise with somebody to build a group that to accomplish things.
A question over here, and then we'll get to you. You've had your hand up.
Thank you very much. My name is Ian McGiffin. I'm a senior here. I've met you before, Representative Cartwright, when I was on the DC program. This question is for you. So tonight you shared that you're still optimistic about the state of American democracy. You've described a, quote, wellspring of goodness within the American people. This is personally not a belief that I share. I do not share the same optimism that you do. My question for you is, how would we, the American people, restore the faith of more pessimistic Americans, and I quite frankly believe the average American like myself, who no longer has faith that American democracy will function into the future?
Well, you know, when I say I'm optimistic, don't confuse that with complacency. I'm not complacent. I mean, I think that's the message that I'm trying to convey here tonight is that we cannot sit on our hands. We cannot be overly confident about our democracy. We have to fight for it. We have to speak up for it. We have to encourage people to run for office. We have to encourage good people to run for office. And we need to help them. Get involved, roll up your sleeves. This is a full participation sport. And as Americans, I think it's all of our duty to involve ourselves in the process and to help keep this democracy going. Don't confuse optimism with complacency. It's not. We have to work to hang on. I mean, that's why I quoted Benjamin Franklin. Thanks for the question. Thanks for visiting me in Washington, too.
We have a question in front here.
Thank you both for coming and speaking today. You touched briefly on the role polarization played in January 6th, and keeping our current political climate in mind and what seems to be escalating political violence. I'm curious as to what you think, if this is a plague of polarization of the elite, of our leaders, of those who are in Congress, or a polarization of the public and how we treat each other in regards to our political parties being our social identities, and how we might go resolving this polarization we're facing. Thank you.
That is a fantastic question, and really the basis of the problems that we face. I'm not sure when this really started. I mean, there's always been some level of factionalization, and our founders feared that. I mean, George Washington greatly feared parties and factionalization, and his farewell address was a warning to the country about how it would play out, and a lot of it was very prescient, right? But I think the current period of that, up until probably the 60s and 70s and maybe even a little beyond, was this system where the moderate Republicans and the moderate Democrats governed. They acted like, you know, a city council when they had to come up with a budget and find out real solutions to fund the police department and those types of things. And now it's the point where there are some mundane things that, you know, get through on a bipartisan basis, but anything significant pretty much is all one party or not, doesn't happen at all. And one problem is that the leadership in both parties, you know, Nancy Pelosi and Mike Johnson, for example, have been, rank and file congressmen have ceded too much power, and those leaders have responded by wielding an iron hand. If a congressman gets out of line, they don't get this committee or that, or they don't. And congressmen have got to be brave and stand up to that. And another thing is there's too many people in Congress who decide, you know, am I going to risk my seat by doing the right thing, whatever the right thing is, by taking on leadership on this aspect or that, or voting to impeach the president that's in your party or whatever, you know, am I going to give up this seat that I really like? You know, I'm the smartest guy in the world, obviously, and I'm the best suited to serve my constituents, and the country's better off with me here, so it's okay if I turn my head the other way and vote against my oath. I want to preserve my seat and my authority. And too many people on both sides of the aisle have succumbed to that. And people need to be more vigilant about watching those folks and making sure that they get them out of Congress. You know, term limits may play a part. I've never been one who's been a fan of term limits. I always thought that the voters decided how long their congressperson would serve, but maybe if the voters are not going to be more educated than they are, maybe term limits might be one of the ways that you can resolve that problem.
I've mentioned it before. I think gerrymandering is a big culprit in the hyper-partisanship. But you know, Tom's right. Hyper-partisanship has been around for a very long time in this country. Probably no one was as guilty of hyper-partisanship as Alexander Hamilton. If you read Hamilton, then raise your hand if you read Chernow's book on Hamilton. Well, read it, okay? Make it your business to read that. It's really good. They made a musical out of that book.
Do they sell the Cliff Notes?
Yeah.
He was the advisor for
Washington.
for Manuel's. But Lin-Manuel musical. But no, he was so angry at, who was it? He was angry
Aaron
at
Burr.
Pardon me?
Aaron Burr.
Well, Aaron Burr, to be sure, but he wrote an 89-page polemic about the lineage of one of his opponents. Might have been Jefferson, alleging that he was the spawn of illegitimate people, bastards, and let's face it, Alexander Hamilton had a couple pages stuck together to do something like that. But it's the same thing that we see now. I mean, people hollering horrible things at each other over politics. That's not why we got involved in politics. We got involved to help the people at home, to help the country. And my attitude has always been this. Do the math. If you want to pass a bill in Congress, you've got to have bipartisan support. We talked about it. If you're going to get a vote in the Senate, you need votes from both sides of the aisle. The best way in the House to put forward a bill that will appeal to both sides in the Senate is to get support in the House from both sides. And that's how I got to know guys like Tom Rice. I worked across the aisle to get to know them. You know, you realize that they're good people and they care about this country and they just have different strategy about how to help this country when you get right down to it. In 12 years, I ended up passing 16 bills into law with that philosophy, signed by 3 presidents. So I meant to make myself effective, and with that philosophy, I got a lot done.
So I think there was in that question as well, it wasn't just about in Congress and political parties, but also society, right? I mean, we live in separate communities often. People don't even marry people anymore from the other party, right? I mean, we keep hearing about things like that. I mean, what does that say about us, the American people?
Well, I think it's fostered by leadership, and I think it's amplified by biased news media, and I think it's amplified again by social media without any, consequence or basis in truth. So it is difficult. I would hate to propose any kind of regulation of social media because I guess people should be able to say what they ought to say, but it's a difficult problem. It's a difficult, we don't need leaders like Donald Trump who are so partisan. We don't. We should focus on people who have integrity. I've told Ty several times in the lead up to this that I feel like the last couple of presidents, or few presidents perhaps, have not had a lot of integrity. I feel like they've turned the presidency into a profit-making occupation, and that's not what it's meant to be. And I hope, I'm really worried about the underpinnings of our country because it is being severely undermined. And we've got to root out the corruption. And we've got to, our next leader, whether he be Democrat or Republican or independent or Bugs Bunny party, it doesn't matter to me, as long as they have integrity, as long as their real focus is not preserving their power or building their wealth, but doing the right thing for the country.
I'll give you my answer, Dave. I think that we will always have demagogues spewing partisan nonsense, always. That's just how it is, human nature. The question is, when are we most susceptible to that? Well, the biggest protections against demagoguery and extremism are a strong economy, so that people have what they need, and a great education system, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
We have a couple more questions out here. If the student, whoever has a microphone, here we go, one over here.
Hi, I'd like to thank both of you for being here on this campus today. You made a good point in the beginning about how if Americans were offered $10,000, they'd be willing to take that money on the basis of affordability and stability.
Some Americans.
Considering that grocery prices played such a crucial role in the last election, how do you think that will affect the midterms? And is there any bipartisan policies that can be put in place to make affordability a more important factor for people in the next election cycle?
I can tell you about people in my own congressional district. I represented northeastern Pennsylvania for 12 years in the Congress, and I got to know those people pretty well. We talked about, how do you hold down a district that voted for Donald Trump 3 times? And it was by paying a lot of attention to what people want and what they need and how they feel, and I did. What I found was there's a lot of economic pain out there, and whether it was the downturn, as Tom mentioned, from 2008, 2009, or the COVID, or we're going to have bumps in the economy, lots. But that's when extremists do the best, when the economy's not doing well. That's what I saw. And people vote for change, right? People say, well, how, Cartwright, Obama won your district by almost 10%, and then Trump won it by 12%. What's going on with your district? Are they all drinking something funny? The answer is no, they're hurting. And what's the one thing that Barack Obama and Donald Trump ever had in common? They were both the candidate of change. Okay? Obama, that was his slogan, change we can believe in. You don't remember that. You were in elementary school when that happened. But that was his slogan. And Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton, who had been inside the Beltway for 2 generations, right? How could she ever make herself the candidate of change versus this brash-talking businessman who claims to be the best at everything? The problem is that voting for change isn't always the answer, because a lot of times change is not for the better.
Okay, we have another question, I think, in the back, and then I'll get to you.
Hi, I wanted to thank you both for being here tonight. We've talked a lot about division, whether it be among citizens in the United States or in government. And I wanted to know if there's anything you think we can do, structural or cultural changes that we can bring to push, back into style leaders who display a principle that you've talked about of working together instead of leaders who display a strong partisanship. That's obviously an issue you've talked about, and I was wondering if there's any way you think we can fix this in our country.
Tom, you have a thought on that?
Well, a couple of solutions. I mean, well, first of all, you look for the right candidates, right, who say the right things. Problem with that is, when you have somebody who says, I'm going to work across the aisle and I'm going to take the reasonable path, in most districts, out of 435 House seats, I read recently, I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say it's something like 40 of them are actually competitive. Out of 435, 40, so 10%. The other 90% are either solid red or solid blue, right? And so if you're in a solid red district and you don't say hard red things, you're not going to win the primary. That's just how it is. And if you're in a solid blue district and you don't say hard blue things, and to hell with the other side, you're not going to win your primary. You're never going to get a chance to run in the general election. So maybe the solution there is another party or two parties or three parties where people have to build consensus to get anything done.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question, and we'll take it over here.
First of all, thank you for visiting Hamilton. And I'm from California, and I was intrigued by what one of you said about gerrymandering is a culprit. I just wondering, what is your view on passing a proposal such as Prop 50 in California in November in response to the redistricting in Texas? Would you say it is a justified way and efficient way to bring back the American democracy?
Well, my old ears aren't what they used to
She's
be.
asking about the
She-
redistricting, California redistricting after the.
She was
Texas
asking
one.
if the redistricting in California was appropriate in response to the redistricting in Texas.
Right. It's funny. California redistricting has a history, and there was a big fight between a friend of mine. You remember Alan Lowenthal came in with our class, Tom, and he was the president of the Senate in California the last time redistricting came up, and that was when Lowenthal and some others came up with the redistricting commission idea, so that instead of Congress, instead of the state coming up with a map, you come up with a commission, and they come up with fair districts. And who was dead set against that was Nancy Pelosi. And so Alan Lowenthal and Nancy Pelosi, two Democrats, were at loggerheads about that. She was convinced that if you go to a commission, the Democrats will lose a lot of seats from California. It did go through the commission, to draw fair and sensible districts. It did go through, and to Alan Lowenthal's everlasting relief, they did not lose Democratic seats because of it. But now we have, I guess, Gavin Newsom threatening to respond to the Texas gerrymandering, the same thing in California. Yeah, I don't think that's the answer. We have to get rid of gerrymandering, and we have to figure out how. Ultimately, I think it has to go to the courts, and I despair about whether our current Supreme Court will lift a finger to get rid of gerrymandering.
I mean, if you look at California, California has, from memory, it's been a while since I looked at it. I think they have 53 representatives. Okay, people say we have a democracy. We really don't have a democracy. We have a republic. And the Senate is based on 2 senators for each state, regardless of population. So it's really not a one vote, one man, arrangement. The House of Representatives is the most pure form of democracy that we have in the country, and it is based on population. California has the most people, so they have the most representatives. I'm not positive about the number, but I want to say they have 53 representatives out of 435 people in the House. 53 of them are from California. And I believe something like 6 or 7 of those 53 are Republicans.
Yeah.
So 45, 6, 7 of the people from California are Democrats. Well, if you look at the results of the presidential election, I think Donald Trump got 40% of the votes or more in California. But there's only about 10% of the representatives from California that are Republican. And that shows you how gerrymandered that California was already before you talk about this proposition. Now, the Texas has 35, I think, representatives.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many are Democrats, but it's a bigger percentage.
Yeah.
And so Texas is looking to be more like California in terms of how skewed it is in, underrepresenting the minority, right? So, yeah, it's a swirling cesspool to the race to the bottom, and there should be something done about it, but you can run up against the Constitution, because the founders said in the Constitution, we want a limited, smaller federal government, and we don't want the federal government to dictate to the states how they run their elections. So I would be very wary of the federal government dictating to California or Texas or any other state how they, comprise their voting districts.
Okay, I think we are just about out of time. I'd like to ask both of you gentlemen, politics is, you called it a contact sport, a full contact sport, certainly a blood sport. It can get ugly. What would you say to these young people? This is important. Politics is important. What would you say to them to get them to care, to be involved, to become involved as they progress?
Well, I would say this. Study the facts. Master the facts. There are not enough people out there learning the facts in such a way that they can teach them to others. I forget who said it, but somebody smart said, look, you're entitled to your opinion. You're not entitled to your own facts. And that's the only way we move forward in a reasoned, sensible, rational way, is master the facts first. And so steer away from cable TV news. Be careful of what internet sites you learn from. Think about your sources. This is what we teach here at Hamilton College, critical thinking, right? Use your critical thinking cap and master the facts so that you can go out and set people straight when they veer off into hyperspace about their set of facts.
Tom?
I completely, 100% agree with my very often wrong because he's a Democrat colleague. The best way to fight the current situation is to be educated and involved, and please be involved. You're our hope, right? And when you get to Washington, don't just listen to the leadership. Do what you think is right. Do what you think is right, and help us work through these problems.
Well, thanks for being here, excuse me, and giving us a sense of what happened back on January 6th, and also this idea of looking forward. You modeled civility here today, and that's something we sorely need in our political culture. We hope that's something that those 535 people in Washington, D.C. can learn from. And thank you very much. It's been a terrific discussion.
Thank you.